Hi, everybody. Welcome to our second Tuesday seminar of the year. This one is a pure hybrid format. We've got the speakers split between in person and out in the internet, and I'm also joined online by my awesome co-chair Alicia, who's joining us by Zoom. It is a hard time to be a mainstream political party or politician in Latin America, at least if you want to get elected. Whether it's Argentina or Colombia, Chile, Peru, Brazil, Mexico, Bolivia, El Salvador, mainstream political parties of the center left and the center right are regularly now losing elections to political outsiders, many of whom position themselves on one of the extremes. In many cases, I'd say particularly Colombia, but not just Colombia, centrist candidates are routinely finishing third in the first round of presidential elections, leaving the runoff to more extreme candidates of the left and the right. Now, collapse of the center may be a good thing, it may be a bad thing, but it's definitely a thing. So today, we want to explore the crisis of the political center in Latin America, or maybe it's better to call it, I think Claudia would prefer to call it challenges facing the political center in Latin America. And to help us grapple with that question, we have two outstanding panelists, two respected former mayors who've been active in their national politics for a decade. Horacio seems to be arriving. Both of our panelists are positioned broadly in the center of their country's political spectrum. One may be leaning a little more to the right, another one leaning maybe a little bit more to the left. I'll let you decide which is which. But I'm going to introduce them, and then they'll speak for 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have a discussion. Okay? All right, so we'll begin with Horacio Rodriguez Larreta, who may or may not actually speak first because he hasn't beamed in yet. Horacio is a former two-term mayor of Buenos Aires. He earned a BA from the Universidad de Buenos Aires, and then went on to get an MBA from the Harvard. After which he returned to Argentina to pursue a career in politics.
Sí, que tener la cámara. Sí.
Horacio, no te vemos.
Hello?
Horacio, hola.
Tienes que prender la cámara, no te vemos.
I'm introducing you.
¿Seguro? Sí, sí.
Bad thing is I'm about to go over how his widespread image of competence. And
Hola.
hola. All right, I'm going to. Horacio run both the Social Security system and the IRS. In 2002, he co-founded the PRO party together with Mauricio Macri. He served as chief of cabinet of the city of Buenos Aires when Macri was mayor between 2005 or 2007, 2015. And 2015, he was elected mayor of Buenos Aires. By virtually all accounts, he performed well. He was overwhelmingly reelected mayor in 2019. He earned a reputation for both competence and a moderate consensus-oriented approach to governance. Unfortunately, that's not what many of his party's voters were looking for when Horacio launched a presidential bid in 2023. He lost a closely fought primary, and his party went on to lose to extreme right candidate Javier Milei. And hopefully we'll have Horacio back soon. I have a feeling we'll start with you, Claudia.
He's logging back.
Okay. Claudia López, to my right, is a PhD in political science from Northwestern University. Do I need to even say any more? She served in the Colombian Senate from 2014 to 2018. That's rare. You do not see many political scientists actually getting elected to anything. That was pretty good. She was vice presidential candidate of the Green Alliance presidential election. Is that right, vice president? Finishing third. In 2019, Claudia was elected mayor of Bogotá. There he is. Hold on a second. Hold on. I have to right to get to you. Claudia was elected mayor of Bogotá in 2019. She was the first elected woman to hold that position, the first openly gay mayor of Bogotá. Claudia is currently an advanced leadership initiative fellow here at Harvard, where she has become a very active member of the doctor class community, among many other things. She has created and is running a seminar series, almost a competitor seminar series to the Tuesday seminar. So I want to announce that it's a terrific seminar series on Latin American security challenges in the face of authoritarian populism. The first of the 4 seminars will be Monday, October 7th of this year, from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock in CJ South Room 216, which is right here. So a Tuesday seminar-like event, except on a Monday. And the first panel will be is entitled "Tackling Crime and Justice Failures: Strategies for Effective Policing and Justice Provision." The speakers will be it'll be moderated by Alicia, it'll be introduced by Alicia, moderated by Claudia, and the speakers will be Guillermo Trejo, a political scientist at Notre Dame, Rodrigo Canales from BU, and our very own Horacio Rodriguez Larreta. So, Horacio, you hear me okay?
I am here, yes. You see me?
Yes, we see you, we hear you. I've already introduced you and we've lined you up to speak. Are you ready to go?
Yes, I am.
Okay, you're on.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. The problem is you posed a very difficult question to us. Is why can't we win elections in Latin America? The first easy answer I have is I don't have a clue on this. I don't have idea what to do with this. Because if it were my case, I should conclude that either I did everything wrong or that is somehow true what you are saying in that statement. But I don't want to give up, so let's think together. Because if you see my case, by the end of 21, you ask anyone in Buenos Aires, and I was almost elected president, for the election of 23. I had been re-elected in Buenos Aires in 19 with the largest election ever. We won the midterm elections in 21. I somehow managed quite well and very well perceived the COVID challenge. So I was in the final step of my race. I was almost there, but I'm here. And we have this populist that won the election, and the question you pose is, well, what happened? What happened? It's still a year later, still rethinking of what I did wrong, and of course there's a kind of context situation all over the world that many countries are facing, which doesn't mean that we cannot win. So let's think together. First of all, you need a kind of diagnosis. Today, the context is marked by very negative emotions, distrust in institutions, distrust in democracy. In my country specifically, inequality, a long-lasting story of economic failure. So all together is a very, very convenient situation for the populism. And they have a method. You follow what they are doing all over the world. They have a pattern that first of all, I didn't know, so probably didn't study as deep as I should, and I didn't know how to manage. First of all, this idea of presenting shortcuts. I mean, people are anxious with the situation. So for all that, populism with their illusory and magical promises is very tempting for people to hear after the failure of decades of politicians to have someone with magic ideas and solutions. It's what they want to hear. They always come in with the shortcuts, with saying that putting a bomb to the system is easier and quicker than to fix it, which is a much tougher task. So with the shortcuts, in my situation, I insisted on a rational, broad, deep, long-term plan. And that was not what people want to hear. They needed immediate answers. That's the first problem. I didn't know how to manage that. Second is that their campaign is 100% emotional. It's something we talked to Claudia when I was there. It's emotions. And I am a rational guy. So I have to, change myself. he, in our case, Millet set extreme proposals at the extreme of saying that people would be able to sell a part of their bodies, or that they could sell the babies, because it's a market too. For any rational candidate, that would be the end of the career. And he won, appealing to emotions. And again, it's something I couldn't handle. I thought that with my rational, I had a plan for any single issue or challenge in government, and I didn't work. I couldn't pass that message. And the third method they have all over the world, as they are very aggressive, insulting. He said the most extreme insults, and I thought, mistakenly, as I see today, that with a rational and moderate, that not entering in personal attacks to extreme, somehow not to defend myself, because I thought that people would never take into account with what this crazy guy was saying, who will hear him, who will believe such an extreme attacks. He entered even in personal attacks. He said that I had an extramarital abortion, which of course is completely a lie. But again, he sends and repeats and repeats and repeats. He's been almost 1 year of the campaign in 2022, insulting at me. Why at me? Why to me? Because I was leading in the polls. And I had this bad strategy not to answer, because if I answer, I'm giving importance to him, nobody would take care. Well, look where I am. So again, we need to learn how to deal with this aggression. It's not it's not a good idea not to hear it. So again, the question comes again: how can we win? First of all, I'm sure we can, because what they need to win the election is not the same as what they need to govern. So I have to trust on my convictions that populism is not the way for progress in Latin America and in Argentina. That is so true for left or for right wings. It won't work. I mean, it's not the way. My country in Argentina, even more, we need a broad and long-lasting transformations. I mean, Argentina, if you take the last century, we've been back and forth in a never-ending pendulum. Every new president pretends to be a founder more than maintaining policies. A founder, and Milei is doing the same. He's following the same pattern. That's why I'm sure that sooner or later he will fail, because this is not the way. I mean, to achieve long-lasting and really deep reforms, you need three things that are equally important. First of all, a vision, an idea, a plan. And the only plan he has is to stabilize the economy, which is correct, of course. I should have done the same. But he's lowering inflation with a very strict fiscal equilibrium. But still, there are many economists, very, very serious ones, that are doubting on the sustainability. But even if he can stabilize, my view is that we need a development plan. We need a plan to grow. We need a plan to, double our exports to the world, to open markets, a plan to promote innovation, to promote applied sciences, a plan to adapt our labor force, to raise employment. I mean, all that, it's not in his vocabulary. He doesn't speak about this. He doesn't believe on that. And also, we need a state. We need to rebuild a state, smaller one, for sure, smaller one. But we need a state that guarantees leveling opportunities through a better education system, through assuring nutrition for babies or for children in the first years, security, health. Well, all that are services given by the state. In Argentina, 70% of education is public. People cannot afford it. So on that, both on the development plan and on the need of rebuilding a state, our president, he's very against it. He doesn't believe that the state shouldn't play any role. He considers himself anarcho-capitalist without a state at an extreme. But, and that's on the ideas. Second, he does not believe in politics. He's not building any consensus. I'm sure, and my view does not change because I lost the election, but for having a long-lasting plan that, I mean, we maintain for decades, it has to be built on over a consensus, over an agreement, a larger agreement. That does not mean that everyone should agree on that. I mean, unanimity is impossible. That's not democracy, but you need a broader consensus. And that was the key message of my campaign, but people didn't vote it at that time. I mean, people changed on that. If you see the history in Argentina, the recent history, 4 years before the last election, Cristina Kirchner, to win the election, she chose a centrist, Alberto Fernandez. Then he ended up being a very, very bad president. But at that moment, to win the election, they have to move to the center. That was 4 years ago. So things change. Things change. And third, Argentina to really develop, we need good management, good executions to get things done. I believe on that. I devoted my life to try to make the state work better. You need people with experience. You need people that know. I tried to say this message based on my experience as mayor of Buenos Aires, which is highly recognized. Well, but it didn't work at that time. So I think we should maintain our convictions. If my conviction is that is the way for Argentina to develop, we have to keep on that. The populist approach will not work. This is not enough. We cannot build our career expecting or hope, I wouldn't say hoping, but expecting that the government won't work. We need to rebuild our message. We have to rethink our message. On my view, and that's my personal approach, is that we need to base on real change, on results. We need to stress the ability to get things done and showing good examples of public management, showing that the state can be managed better. And mostly on issues of everyday life of people. You have to talk about education, about public works, about health, showing that the state can work or should work. That's the first message, just as opposed to this anarcho-capitalist destruction of the state. That's the first one. Second, we need to regain the concept of hope. I mean, these populists are based much more on hate, on people resentment. So we need to revalue the concept of hope. I know it sounds difficult in times that politicians cannot fulfill people's expectations, in times when polarization is promoted by the social networks. However, we need to be creative on regaining the message of hope, a realistic hope, not neglecting the problems that people are suffering today. But we need to share dreams. We cannot be against to build a message or a campaign against the other one. And then it's something I have to learn, I have to develop more, is emotion. Rationality is essential to govern. It's a way to govern in a good way, but it doesn't make you win elections. We have the challenge of building something like the epic of moderation, the fanatism for the center. That can sound contradictory, but that's our challenge. I know it sounds difficult. And also, another difficult challenge is to build a new way of making politics with new people, new forms. In this, I still don't know exactly what it means. But again, we need to regain the words change, new, because these people are I mean, based on hate, on insults, we have to be on the other side again with, of course, creative communication, and that's what I'm convinced that my country and all Latin America needs. It's a moderate alternative to build consensus, to develop a long-term plan with long-lasting challenges. Argentina needs a couple of decades of sustainable plan that we keep and end up with this pendulum. And I will work on that. I know that to develop this, we need to win elections. But I'm sure that maintaining my convictions at the end of the day, sooner than later, we will do it. We'll do it. I'm optimistic on this. Probably based on my pessimism on the populist approach. But let's not give up. Okay?
Thank you. Claudia.
Well, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to see you all here to have this conversation along with you and with Horacio, who has been a great friend. So let me start by this topic. So who is defeating us? Let us start by that. So is populist or authoritarian or both? It's a combination of either one or both who are actually taking the stage in politics, being much more successful in elections. So let's start by understanding that this is not simply because we made mistakes, probably we did, in the political field. We should have better strategies and comprehension of the challenges that we're dealing with. But there are sort of structural tendencies that explains why there is a rise in populism. It's not only a failure of a strategy or comprehension. So a couple of things that are happening, and that I think we need to both research and understand more deeply and better to address this. First of all, there are sort of information and technology change. Globalization brought that. And it's not only that we have more technologies, information to spread rapidly. You have read, for example, a recent book by Yuval Harari. He's trying to explain why this massive wave of accumulation and dissemination of information is causing trouble. And there is a fact, because you can say, well, the same way that populists use social media, then centrists can use social media. Yeah, that's true. That's a resource that's available for anyone who can use it. But there is a fact. Outrage travels faster than hope. Negative travels faster than positive. And that's a fact of contemporary massive global communication. And that has been measured in all kinds of papers and research, and that's something we need to acknowledge. The second thing is cultural factors. So the rise of unresolved issues of identity politics, racism, for example, or nationalism, or intergenerational factors. So that's influencing also. There is a new cleavages, to call it somehow. There are new factors that are there to be grabbed. And that's part of any politician work, is how to interpret, to recognize, to identify, to frame, and to grab a cleavage as a factor for politics. So there are new ways of all factors, or new waves of all those things that are unresolved in the identity politics or cultural factors. So that's a second thing that is there. And of course, this could be contextual based, country by country, but that's some tendency. There are unaddressed expectations in democracy. So these are not really cultural factors, but I would say, let's say, structural inequality and corruption are new visitors in Latin American politics. They are there. And we sort of forget, that maybe we can work on some other issues, let's say education, let's say employment, let's say development, and sort of not truly address the source, the roots of inequality or corruption, and somehow we will make it. Well, this sort of like the Phantom of the Opera, I will come back and will take you, accountable for it, for not addressing that sort of structural factor. There are new sort of global tendencies in the global economy sort of this dislocation of jobs across the globe. That's part of what globalization caused. That's what was expected about globalization, and diversification and specialization of global trade. So you will be good at some things, but not at some other things. Those things will move wherever they are have a competitive advantage for it. But the fact is capital can flow, but people cannot. So labor cannot move. So globalization is an unresolved expectation, because if really you want to get that competitive advantage, then all sources should be able to flow. But that's not the case. That's not the case, and quite the opposite. Migration became a more crucial issue. So this dislocation of jobs that, along with some new factors such as new challenges, more pressing challenges such as climate change, create literally massive wave of people who are dislocated for whatever they can do, a decent way of living or of dignity, and so on and so forth. Security. In Latin America, I would say both inequality and insecurity are simply the most pressing issues, the more structural issues that are simply not well addressed by democracy in general, and leaves some space for. So we are, in Latin America, we are like 9% of the population of the world, but we account for a third of the homicides in the world. The level of uncertainty, of fear that it could cause is something sort of with disregard. And we cannot simply disregard. You know, I always say this both as a political scientist and as a politician, and you know, sort of emptiness and void, that's something that exists in physics, not in politics. Whatever is not addressed in politics, somebody will come and will grab it. So that's another set of factors that we need to take into account. The fourth thing that I will mention is this sort of legacy that somehow is still present in the history of the region of sort of limited state capacity and restrictive democracy. So it has taken us a long time to actually complete the pluralistic representation of our societies. It took a huge deal to incorporate the indigenous people into the polity, actually, not into the population. They have been there forever. The Afro-descendant people, the lower and middle class. So this sort of populism is to some extent in Latin America the price we pay for a lengthy or neglected democratization. It takes too long to do, you know, the simple thing that people can actually be represented, not only vote mechanically, but actually be represented. That matters for what decisions are made, for the distribution of the budget, for the outcomes we brought to society. So that's also part of the issue. There is this structural factor of restrictive democracies, limited representation, limited pluralism, limited inclusion, and also limited state capacity. And this sort of create a sort of a negative feedback, because you have these restrictive democracies, limited state capacity, so you cannot address properly the inequality issues, you cannot address properly the provision of security and justice. So if feedback is sort of a loophole that we haven't been able to resolve properly. And so our middle class, which could be a stabilizer of both the economy and the political system, is too small, it's too fragile. It's too fragile. So you ask me, for example, in my own country, we are 52 million people. If you see the last figures of the National Statistics of the Department of National Statistics, like 16 million people are poor, 16 million people are middle class, and there are 16 million people sort of in between. They are not fully poor, but they are not middle class either. So it's a very, and finally, I would say it's not only a limited base, but it's a very uncertain and unstable base. And the one who suffer, or who think at least that they give the most, they sort of pay taxes, but corruption takes part of them. They have a voice and they vote, but they are not fully represented. the issues of security. They have something to lose, either jobs, small businesses, and they are not being sort of satisfied in the protection. So I would say that's the big picture we need to understand. This has global tendencies. This has regional tendencies. These have very contextual based expressions. These factors can have in Argentina are quite different from what they can have in Colombia or in Peru. But at the end, we belong to the same world. They somehow will apply. So we need to understand. Now, the alternatives, sort of Horacio provides this sort of recipe what it needs to be done. I'm sort of we have this friendly conversation, Horacio. I will, as a politician, I will say, no, that's not the recipe. Sort of, why not? First of all, because really we need to start by taking these 5 structural factors and figuring out how they do act. How are they present in the polity and the economy of our countries? That's the first task to actually do, is to deeply understand. This is not about messaging, simply. It's not about changing a message. It's about having a very more detailed, nailed understanding of this. Now, there are simple things that also accrue that we in the more sort of national context costs. For example, it's obvious that if you see, for example, let me take the case of Colombia, there are a lot of pooling right now. We are 2 years before the next national campaign. There are a lot of pooling and research group and studies of trying to figure out what's people thinking, what's people feeling. And what you find out in all those polls is both centrists, those who claim are not far left, not far right, are supposedly the majority. Those who think they are middle class or want to be middle class, they are supposedly the majority. But if you think actually they are not the majority because they are just a residual, either the far left or the far right, or even the right, take away the adjective. They are organized. They have identity. They know who their people is. They know what they want. They have a platform for organization. But the residual, which is the center, has none of that. And it's sort of the same for the middle class. There are people who are not middle class. They are friends of mine who, win like $3,000 a month. According to Colombian terms, that's not middle class, that's upper class. But there are people, making $5,000 a month that they think that they are the poor middle class being exploited. But that's how they feel. And that's how they act and so vote. So there is sort of a cross-class thing here beyond the categories of middle class or centrist. But that's just a residual, which in the terms of Marshall Gangs, fantastic professor of Harvard, that's a constituency to be built. It's the same thing to have a social group or a social category than to have a constituency. Constituency is something that has an identity, that has a narrative of identity. Who we are, what we want, what we stand for, how we organize, how do we mobilize. That's a task. There's an opportunity. It's a challenge, but it's an opportunity to be grabbed there to compete against populist people who actually have a very simple organized base and constituency. We the people against the corrupt elite. Who is the corrupt elite? Whoever is not my people. Simple and easy. Simple and easy. But it's not only that the definition is simple, it's actually that we need to acknowledge that they do a good, organized constituency mobilizing base and feeding that base. And that's a 24/7 job. It's not something you do for elections. It's something you do for job, for being in politics. So that's one thing. The second thing is, in addition to constituency building, it will reduce fragmentation on the base, on the electoral base, I would say. But there is also, I have to admit, that's Colombian case is the classic, is the fragmentation of the offer too. Yeah. So there is one Milei, there is one Petro, right? There is one Álvaro Uribe, right? But there are 20 candidates in the Senate, right? Or 30 candidates. I mean, I have a good friend who's doing polling on Colombia and said, look, I did my best, the largest list I could ever. I include 50 people that may run in 2026. And I got 5 calls, complaining that I didn't include all of them. I mean, how much? How many do I have to? So there is fragmentation and disorganization on the base, but there is also fragmentation and disorganization on the offer. So you will say, well, coalitions, cross-class coalitions, primaries may solve that work. It's not that hard. It's common sense, but common sense not always applied, unfortunately, for politics. But it leads us, the fact that this outrage or exclusion or lack of representation is cross-class, is heavily charged over the middle class. I think that's are the people to be grabbed for, at least in Latin American context, I would say. But that leads us to challenge also. And if you follow this argument, then probably part of the solution will be a kind of catch-all type of party or catch-all type of coalition. And it's not that easy to manage that, because then a catch-all party is not a very strong identity party. A catch-all party is not really a very strong platform, solution-driven kind of tailor-made for some people kind of party. So it will bring you to that challenge. What is the proper sort of equilibrium point on that? Fourth, I think, as Horacio mentioned, yeah, there is, embrace passion. I mean, it's not that suddenly politics is about feelings. Politics has been about feelings always, forever. And no, you don't have to be irresponsible. You don't have to be irrational. But yes, you need to understand and connect, not only understand, but connect with whatever people feel. There is a reason why, amidst violence and impunity, you feel fear. And that's reasonable. And connect empathically with that feeling is the minimum of respect, not only of common sense. So embrace passion, embrace character. You will confront, I don't know, to the best of my knowledge, Steve, a populist candidate, even less a populist authoritarian candidate who is not an embodiment of character. So passion and character is at least something sort of in the way we do things that we should not renounce to. So expecting this, resurgence of moderation, of ambiguity. No, moderation and ambiguity and lack of statement and lack of character and lack of positions and lack of what do you stand actually for? That's not the way we're gonna solve this. So that's something that I think at least we need to keep it going. Now, there are other things that I think will help us in the moment, but I want to mention a couple of factors that might be, that we should keep in mind. So one of the things that we can use now is that, well, the same thing that centrist candidates or centrist politicians or government people have a record, where populists also have a record. And that's something we should do. So populists in Latin America have come and go. They didn't reduce inequality. They used inequality, yes, but they didn't reduce it. They claim a sort of elite-driven economy, not very inclusive, not very formal, not very modern, but they didn't create one either. So sort of they are good for elections, but not for delivering, sort of. And that's a record that has to be claimed also and used in politics. And on top of that, they clearly decline the institutions we have. And yes, I understand this love for institutions, that we are the institutionalists. Yes, I am an institutionalist, both as a political scientist and as a politician. But I also understand that when I claim people, to protect the institutions of Colombia, they tell me, really, you want me to protect the institutions? What kind of institutions? These institutions that never, ever represented me, that actually abused me? These fantastic Colombian institutions that have the longest story of democracy and elected democracy in Latin America, but somehow have at the same time the worst record of human rights violations compared to all other dictatorships combined in the region. Those are the institutions you're calling me to protect and defend? Come on. So yes, we don't want caudillism, because we know personal-driven solutions are not solutions and are not sustainable. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge that institutions, that what we call institutions, have failed to people. So it's rational as much as emotional to call for institutional change too. And finally, of course, for us, the centrist politicians, the populists are the nightmare. Sort of the nightmare to think, to understand, to get around, to outcompete. But if you see the cases of Colombia or Mexico, you see last Guillermo Trejo's book, for example, or Plata o Plomo of Gustavo Duncan, or my own work in Colombia about the cooptation of paramilitarism and guerrillas or organized crime of politics. So probably organized crime populism is what is emerging. And it's emerging probably at the subnational level, the capturing of politics and subnational politics. It will take time to express at the national level. But one of the consequences of a restrictive democracy and a limited state capacity in Latin America is that we have really a strong both state and political competitors. Whether guerrilla groups, that's pretty much Colombian case, whether paramilitary groups, that's not only the Colombian case, organized crime groups, they are pretty much everywhere. And what happens when you have consistently this gray scenario, this gray institutional definition with these sort of hybrid actors, such as organized crime, is that politicians became, to some extent, providers of who gets protected and who doesn't, like protection rackets. But at the same time, organized crime actors became agents, political agents, meaning they decide, or they could decide, who win and who lost elections and representation. So that combination allows for a pretty scary possibility of a rising of organized crime populism, of a very hybrid kind of politics that will use populism as a mean to win elections, divide and conquer, polarize, keep the attention on identity politics or inequality, but don't actually solve it, just use it. And in fact, they don't want to solve it. They will never, ever solve it, because that's precisely what allows them to be in power. So forget it. They are not about delivering. They're about using. And we, the centrists, are math-driven for delivering and solving, which is correct, but also have this problem. So I will leave it there. But I think we need to keep an eye, because probably our biggest nightmare, and it's already happening, I will say that in the case of Colombia, we have this pleasure to have both left populism and right-wing populism. And not that many countries have had in less than 20 years. Colombia has it. So there is a common ground to sort of learn there. And part of both, I would say, is this sort of mixture of organized crime populism, this mixture of who decide who to protect or not, and who to represent or not. And that combination could be pretty scary, actually.
Great. Thank you. We've got a fair amount of time for discussion. Alicia sent me a question because she's been floating in and out. Alicia, are you secure enough to ask your question now, or do you want me to say it?
I'll try to ask it, and I apologize. I'm catching a flight after this ends, so you might hear background noise. 2 questions. Claudia and Horacio, you both talked about the role of emotion and passions, and the classic joke about the political center is you go to a rally and the call is, you know, what do we want? Moderate change. When do we want it? In due course. Not going to get a lot of people excited. So what are the emotions or passions that the center can actually cultivate to appeal to people? Second is about organizations. Next week, we're going to be talking about the challenges of political parties in the region. So my question for you is, what is the role of building a political party specifically for the center, where the center is trying to make a case for moderation, compromise, stability? Should there be strong investments in building a party, or is it a major liability? Is the best strategy really to go it alone, just like many of the populists on the left and the right? So sorry again for the bad sound and getting in and out, but thanks for the presentation.
And just for context, both Horacio and Claudia have been part of, there aren't very many new center left, center right parties built in the 21st century, certainly not very successful ones. And compared to others, both the experience of certainly PRO, but also the Alianza Verde have been relatively successful. So are those investments worth it? Are they helping? Why don't we start with Horacio? You are muted.
I add Alicia's question to something that Claudia said about the fragmentation of opposition. My conviction is that in Argentina and everywhere, the populists will sooner or later fail in government, because this is not the way to get our countries on a development path. But the fact that they may fail does not mean that people will come back to traditional politics. And that's, for me, probably one of the most difficult questions. In Argentina, that Milei based his message on fighting against the caste. He defines the caste to the political, not only the political, mainly the political power, plus the journalists, plus the union leaders, plus the power. Let's say the system of power that he calls the caste. So even if he fails governing, people won't say, sorry, caste, please come back. And that's very important. I think that we shouldn't think on rebuilding the typical and traditional political parties. Milei won the election with 0 party, no one. He doesn't have even one governor, even one mayor all over Argentina. So we should not make the mistake of thinking that people will go back to traditional politics. I'm not sure it's through parties. I'm not sure. I mean, today I have every week some of the center moderate Argentinian politics calling to make a meeting, a picture showing the people that we are here, the moderates. I think that's not the way. It's not the way. I'm thinking more on a kind of vague movement than a political party. I don't think that today we should put together all the moderates and build another party. We have to think on something new, which, as I said, I'm not sure what it means new. I'm sure what it doesn't mean, which is to put together all the typical politicians. In Argentina, we are giving an opportunity to Milei to say, oh, here they are, the caste. So let's not make such a favor to him. We should go what I call through the borders of politics. No, not to come back, not to go back to the traditional party system. I think it's not the way. It's more a question of positioning with the right ideas on the right time, more than to rebuild a political traditional coalition. That's my view.
What about what moderate emotion looks like?
No, on the motion, I would bet on the emotion of hope, because most of the message of this populist is of hate, is insulting, is aggressive against. Of course, it's probably easier to be aggressive and anything the other says, you insult. So it's very easy, very straightforward. We should try to rebuild, to regain the message of hope, of dreams, of happiness, of the positive feelings. I would go for that. Again, it's not that I'm an expert, otherwise I would be in the pink house, not here.
So, Alicia, I think one of the issues is I never get it, understand. Why cannot we say, what do we want? Change. When do we want it? Now. I mean, what's the matter of saying that? Why it is so hard? I think it's simple, it's easy, and it's needed. I mean, we're not making things up. But the other thing, what really distinguished me, so I have this particular position of being called populist by the right wing in my country. Being called Uribist and right wing by the far left, which actually is something that actually gave me hope. And I said, oh, okay, good. So I'm sort of catching all part of the issues in different sizes and not allowing them to reduce my field, no? My cancha. No? So first. Second, what I think really is the difference, if you ask me, is not the feeling, is not the tone, is not the anger, is through which channel are we going to get that change now? So the populist formula is about me. It's about this person. Just trust me. Just put everything in my hands and I'll give it back to you. That's something I don't believe in. I cannot claim that. So the change is, when do we want change? Change, not passive change, not moderate change, not long-term change, change now. That is to co-responsible collective action now. It's not through individualistic, caudillistic base. That would be sort of my answer. Do we want change deeply and now? Then move, act, not only claim, not only ask, do. Do whatever depends on you and do it right. But if you keep voting to the Congress for clientelistic, corrupt people, you cannot expect that they will govern you the next day as a statement. I mean, they won't. They will rob you. And that's part of your responsibility. That's not my responsibility. I want vote. That's all what I have. I have one vote, the same vote that you have and you have and you have, right? And I think collective action, emotional, collective, meaningful action for collective purposes is possible. It's possible to be done. You know, I've been elected senator. I've been elected mayor of Bogotá. But if you ask me what's my biggest sort of proud in life, is to have been part of the Séptima Papeleta movement when I was a student and young people and a young person. And we were able, in the middle of the most violent clash of drug traffickers at the end of the 90s, to say, guess what? You know, we are not willing that the plata o plomo is going to define our life. And the political system is simply unable either to protect us or to include us. And we organize in student movement. Yes, of course, we managed to have other leads involved in the process, whatever, but we were able to change the Constitution. And the Constitution of 1991 is probably the biggest change for democratic inclusion and modernization of Colombia. Did it come from heaven? Did it come from voting once every 4 years? No, it comes from collective social action for organizing people, power, and change systematically. So that's, I would say, is part of the issue. So what's the best way? was the best instrument to organize people, power, and change on a permanent basis, for cross-social, cross-coalition kind of things. You have to do permanent campaigns, motifs, short-term games. What's the best platform to do that? A party? I'm not sure. But it does not mean that we need parties. Parties are useful to elect people. They are not necessarily the best tool to organize people, power, and change. That's two different things. And when you ask me my own experience, I would say, 25 years later, we were able to include in the Constitution of 1991 these participatory mechanisms for Colombian people to be represented, to not depend fully only on elected representation through parties. So we create La Tutela, we create popular consultation, we can propose and change laws through direct mechanisms with the citizens. We propose these 7 mechanisms. Well, 25 years later, La Consulta Popular Anticorrupción was the first time in history that we actually used one of those mechanisms at the national level. And so far, I cannot tell you how many people told me that I was a populist because I ran and proposed that popular consultation on 7 anti-corruption mandates. But I have to say, the popular anti-corruption consultation has been up to date the largest popular vote ever in Colombian history. No candidate, no president has been able to achieve 11,600,000 votes. So it means, and there is all this fantasy, I would say fantasy, that if you don't offer people something to vote, transportation or sandwich or money, or people don't vote. That's not true. Nobody give them a penny and they vote because it was meaningful, because it was emotional, because it was collective, because it has a sense of short-term achievement and long-term achievement, because it has this sense of defiance to the classic powerful elite people who are in the corrupt system. So I would say you need to combine parties, catch-all parties, which has the opportunities, but also the challenge that I already mentioned, or coalitions, but also acknowledge that there are other different sort of social, street-based, movement-based, but also digital-based platforms that will be much more useful and practical for organizing social change, which is not the same thing as winning elections. Those are two complementary processes, not the same.
Let me open up to questions. We have one comment in from the audience from Lisa North, who informs us, I hate to say this, Claudia, that the slogan "Change Now" is being used by right-wing populists in Canada. Questions in the audience?
But why we have to surrender?
We should not surrender. I'll start with Claudia and then Jean. Carla, sorry.
Okay, thank you. So I have 2 or 3 questions. First one to Horacio, and I'm touching upon many things that Claudia said, so you answered the question partly at least. But I have probably an issue with the framing of the conversation. I'm not too sure that the problem is the center itself. In any case, I don't know how we are defining the center, but maybe people did not reject the center, but reject, and I think that goes to the core to what Claudia was saying, a sort of status quo. So the challenge there would be how to, again, and that goes to what Claudia was saying, how to relate the center, not with status quo, but with change. But again, I mean, Horacio, you alluded to Cristina Kirchner appointing Alberto Fernandez as a centrist. I would go even closer. Her last letter talked about fiscal austerity, and she also pressed against the social assistance and piqueteros and so on. So there is some move to the center, however we are defining it. So it doesn't seem that the center itself is the problem. The second question, Claudia, goes more to you. I mean, it seems there is an assumption that the right-wing constituency is homogeneous, and as you said, it has a community, an identity, and so on. and that the other end of the polarization logic is not, is more fractured or fragmented. And I'm not too sure that the right-wing constituency is that homogeneous.
Everybody is heterogeneous.
Yeah, very true. I mean, last polls in Argentina, Milei is showing clear cracks on his image went down significantly. So, and this because you don't have that homogeneous identity, I assume. And the last question to you, Claudia, is you mentioned as one of the structural dimensions that are worth taking into account to understand the phenomenon, insecurity and violence in particular, and organized crime and so on. And it reminded me when I heard first to Sergio Fajardo what he did in Medellin. And when I was listening to him, I was thinking he was able to do that because precisely the choice was life or death. And how that impacts on public policy and what a politician can do when you as an electorate, you are like betting on your life or not. And I'm not too sure that insecurity then leads to right-wing policies. I mean, Sergio Fajardo was clearly a centrist. So those are my points.
Why don't we collect?
Yes. Sorry.
I'm going to collect a few questions and then we'll answer them in a cluster. So June, and then there's a question here.
This is more for Claudia. When I'm listening to your recommendation, your recipes for what would make a successful candidate, a successful movement, I'm hearing a lot of what Antonis Mockus did in Colombia in terms of collective action, in terms of being able to dominate the media, getting young people involved, a platform of hope. So you have there kind of the idealization, and he lost by a lot. So how would you explain that?
One more.
Yeah, so thank you, Claudia, for this question. So there is a stigma related as well to the population in the middle. So I myself have heard the media, the median point is also related to mediocrity. So I want to understand if is it actually positive to not have purposely not a defined identity in the politics arena.
It will be, I don't understand the question.
So is it actually positive to not have a defined identity?
Okay, Horacio.
Yes, the third question. It's true that probably in Argentina, the problem was not the center, but because if you take the center between right and left, probably was not, I don't think that people voted Milei for being extreme right. I think that people voted Milei for being anti-system, which is different. He was against the system, against everything. So against the parties, as I said, he didn't have a single party with him because he was against it, against politicians, against the power, against. So the question was more extreme or extreme change or status quo. And that's the difficult. That's what Claudia was saying. How can we gain or regain the concept of change to these people that promote extreme change? I mean, I think we should try, not easy, to show that ours is real change because we get things done. The question is, I mean, they will keep the flag of change, but we have to show that their change is not real. It doesn't happen because they don't have experience, because going into an extreme position is not that we'll get an extreme change. They will get no change. That's my view. So we should try to regain the flag of change, but adding the word real change, the change that will happen. That's the difference. Results. We should try to build on that and showing our own experience that we could build results. Like Claudia as Mayor of Bogotá, in my case too. I think there will be a time of showing real change, results, experience on real change. I think we have an opportunity, at least in Argentina, because this government, they don't believe at all in public management. They don't believe at all on state. So they may get the result of lowering inflation, but in any other field of government, they are doing nothing. Even, again, Milei is saying that he will destroy the state. There's zero public works, zero support on I don't know, on innovation and in anything. So I think there will be a chance there. But more on center, we should focus on real change. That's one. And the other one, I think that people at the end of the day will be fed up of aggressiveness. So on that, I like more the word moderate than center, because moderate it's the opposition of a way of doing things. They're aggressive, we are not. We believe on peace. We believe on friendship. We believe, again, in happiness. We have to show the other face. They hate, they insult. So probably, as she was saying, it's not center the best word to use. Of course, moderate, it's not a very, let's say, marketing word too. But we should try to show the opposition of aggressiveness, because if aggressiveness does not bring results, we have to show the other way. So probably, but again, I mean, to build the epic of moderation, it's a challenge. It's not easy, but we should work on that, more on real change and on moderation, more than on center. Okay.
Well, so no, I say no camp is homogeneous. The right is not homogeneous, the left is not homogeneous, whatever we call the center, which is no more than a residual category, is not homogeneous. And precisely that's why you need cross-class coalitions, broader platforms, because class-based politics won't work. There is no way. There are cross sentiments from different people for different reasons, some of them for security, some of them for jobs lost or for identity things. I mean, there are cross-class issues. So it's not class-based politics, I think so. Yet, in the case of Latin America, because still pluralism has been so hard to achieve, so left and right still means something. Still, even today, means something. But that's not the center cleavage, I would say. No. So any prospect is not about bridging, is not trying to bridge. Who are the ones who bridge the divide? No. Why? I mean, these divisions in terms of interest or feelings or purpose, I mean, they have a reason. I'm not saying, Machiavellically, causing false divide of people to manipulate them. No, I'm not claiming to do that, but acknowledging that there are reasonable differences in expectations, in feelings, in fears. And you're there to represent some of them. And framing them is important to do these collective action points that I'm speaking of. Now, in the case of Colombia in particular, well, security and balance. I mean, we are the only country in this hemisphere that still has political balance, the way we used to have it 60 years ago. So that lengthy process of democratization and inclusion to force the right to demobilize political violence through paramilitary, to force the left to demobilize guerrillas and political violence as a way to do politics. It took us 35 years to do that, 35 years to do it. I mean, that's a waste of time. And that creates cleavages and emotions that are very present in politics. So why Attendees was incredibly successful, twice Mayor of Bogotá. Only Antanas Mockus and Enrique Peñalosa have been elected twice Mayor of Bogotá, which is the second most important electoral policy in Colombia. So they were clearly successful. But there is one thing that you need to interpret and represent at the city level. And there is a different thing you need to represent at the national. And that's another reason for Horacio and myself. The fact that being the mayor of the capital gave you such a, show in the media, in politics. So yes, you're able to be known. And leaving anonymity is sort of 90% of the deal in making electoral politics. I will have this sort of joke that I was in 2019 campaigning for Bogotá's mayor's office, and it's so hard. I have one among 4 candidates. I was competing against the candidate of Petro, against the candidate of Uribe, against the candidate of Peñalosa. It was, and suddenly I was on the street, and there is a nice woman called, the whole street, across the street, came to me with this beautiful, lovely, passionate face. I love you. I admire you so much. I'll always vote for you, Claudia López.
Yeah.
But yes, you can leave anonymity in this past, but it doesn't mean people relate to you the national politics issues. You need to get into them. There are different cleavages, different issues, different divisions. So it's not, I'm known. I was pretty well known as Mayor of Bogotá, so I'm sort of, I'm in the top 2 among 30, and it only means recognition. I'm here at Harvard. I'm doing nothing in Colombian politics at the moment. So it's just recognition. It doesn't mean that actually I'm interpreting people. That's the task, interpreting people every single day, every single electoral circle. And so being flexible instead of sectarian is actually a very strategic opportunity for the center. The left, and you have right, I don't think that you can have no identity. Nobody knows really who you are or what do you represent, and you can be successful in politics. No. But I think that not being sectarian, in the sense that here is what I represent. I represent the workers, and I represent the environmentalists, and I don't represent anybody else, and I don't want to represent anybody else. Well, you're gonna have trouble. Because then the only way to succeed is either to grow that base or to polarize that base and hope for the division of the rest, which is sort of complicated for democracy. So one of the things is not about not having an identity, but it's having the acknowledgement. I always say to people, and they sort of get mad when I say this, but in the Colombian context, every time you say, somebody asks me, well, but what do you think you're different from the right and the left? Well, 3 simple things. I never kill anybody. I never assault anybody's pocket. Okay? And I'm not sectarian. I can't understand why some issues on the left are issues. And I'm committed to them. And doesn't mean that I'm giving up my identity. And I understand why there are some issues on the right of macroeconomic stability, or protecting property rights, or security. And I acknowledge those are issues. I'm willing to work with them and to work on them. And it doesn't mean that I'm losing my identity. That's what they call, then you're an opportunist. Okay, you can call it the way you want to. But I think that certain maneuver and flexibility of acknowledging, of bringing not only the people, but the issues, of understanding why and offering a platform and a solution for it is an option. So in the case of Attendees, I wouldn't say that he was not successful. He was incredibly successful. He was not success. Colombia took 20 years more to get to the point in which he could be successful at the national level. But it's not actually that he did something wrong, I think.
So we are unfortunately running out of time. Just to make a final concluding point, I think that Carla and Horacio, in response to Carla, a very, very simple but important point, which is that the political center does not need to be attached to the status quo and doesn't need to be attached to the political establishment. And I think what is killing the center electorally are those two attachments. It's not when candidates, with some exceptions, when candidates of the far left or the far right win, it's not necessarily because the electorate is overwhelmingly with them. In fact, surveys show in almost every country in Latin America, the electorate is broadly centrist. It's that performing on the far left or far right credibly signals your distance from the status quo and credibly signals your distance from the establishment. So the challenge for the center is credibly distancing yourself from the status quo and maybe the establishment without while retaining the sort of moderation in style and substance that you're talking about. I didn't mean to filibuster, but we didn't have enough time for another question. So I promised.
No,
Go ahead. You want to say something?
No, I was saying that what you are saying, this danger of being related to status quo, is what makes me doubt about getting together with other politicians. Because I mean, a meeting with other typical center politicians ends up being related to status quo. So my doubt
I
or
worry
my
though
feeling,
that if every ambitious politician flees all other politicians, what is the collective result of that?
well, that's the challenge. I mean, if you go to one extreme, is what you said. I mean, but on the other side, if we get all together, we end up being the status quo cast, as Milei calls it in Argentina. So that's the challenge.
The only cast that Milei likes is that guy in Chile.
Guys, I'm pretty sorry, but I need to catch up and work to go to the airport. So thank you so
Okay,
much.
good opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much.